from the Anna Hour Sports Show. This is episode 819. I'm joined by a really special guest. Her name is Lindsay Berra. She's a talented sports journalist. She worked on MLB Network for a little bit, and now she has a show called Food of the Gods podcast. Go check it out. It's really awesome. And she's really, speaking of women in sports, she's one of the best out there. And obviously, she's the granddaughter of Yankees legend Yogi Berra. But first, I want to get to her career. But first of all, Lindsay, thank you for joining the show. It's truly an honor, and you're such an inspiration. And how are you and your family doing?
We're all doing great. We're super excited. We got my grandfather's stamp coming out next week, and everyone's getting excited for that. But everybody's good.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about your journey first. What was it like growing up in Jersey as a little child, and when did you start realizing that you wanted to get into sports? Obviously, your grandfather played baseball, but for you, when did you start realizing you wanted to get into sports?
So in my family, we were all sort of into sports from the get-go. There was no really not being into sports. My grandfather encouraged us all to play kind of everything. My dad and my uncles were all three-sport athletes, and our family holidays were wiffle ball in the yard and basketball or football or whatever. We even had a croquet set. Like, everybody was always just playing some sort of sport. So I grew up playing soccer, ice hockey, and softball. I ran and swam and biked, and we basically were the kids who were not allowed in our houses unless there was blood until it was dark out. So I was always just outside running around. And as far as getting into sports for a living, I did play softball at the University of North Carolina, and they had a really good journalism school. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do for a living, but I had taken a lot of AP classes through high school, and I was a really good writer, and I had taken AP English, and my mom just said, you're a good writer, you like sports, why don't you go to journalism school? And for lack of a better idea, that was what I did. So full props to my mom, because it was really her idea.
Yeah. So did you have any like role models growing up in the sports industry? And obviously, was your grandfather one of them?
I think that my grandfather was a role model in general. It's funny, we do a lot of, he has a museum here in North Jersey, Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center, and we do a lot of kids programs now virtually, but just in educational programs in general. And I tell the kids, by the time I was old enough to realize that my grandfather was Yogi Berra, he'd already been grandpa for so long that it was kind of hard to rationalize the grandpa Yogi Berra thing in my head. When I talked about him as my grandpa, he was Grandpa Yogi. When I say, oh, he played an 18 World Series, that's Yogi Berra. And even though I very much know they're the same person, they kind of don't often meet and shake hands in my head. So yes, he was definitely a role model. But it's funny, retrospectively, I look at it, backwards a little bit differently than I look at it when I was in it. And what was super amazing about him as a role model was that, as famous as he was, he never viewed himself like that. And I always say that he was the best at what he did without for a second ever thinking he was better than anyone else. And that is like the best role model to have, period. As far as sports role models were actually concerned, like when I was a kid, my favorite outfielder was Roberto Clemente, which is really weird because he died long before I was born. But my dad and my grandpa Yogi both spoke about his arm from right field with such reverence that it was like impossible to not like Roberto Clemente. I loved Robin Yount as a kid. I was a hockey player. My grandfather introduced me to hockey when I was 5, taking me to Devils games. So I loved a lot of those early Devils, John McClain and Kirk Muller, and I played hockey my whole life. So yeah, I mean, we were just like in sports, but because my grandfather was such a famous guy, the famous athletes were just sort of normal folks to us.
Yeah, I mean, for me. It's not about the fame. It's learning about the people's story and how they got there. And then for you, what did you learn becoming where you are right now as a journalist? And what did you learn? What were the main things that you learned in high school and college that got you to this point as a journalist?
Oh goodness, I don't know if my high school, AP history and AP bio, helped me too much with becoming a sports writer, aside from the fact that it, taught me how to take really good notes and ask good questions and keep myself organized, which is, beneficial for any career, but definitely not sports, but my ability to write was definitely began in high school. I had some great teachers who kind of lit that fire under my butt. But the writing, you know, I went to journalism school at the University of North Carolina. It's a great program. I was very lucky to start at ESPN Magazine right out of college. I was there for 13 years. I covered hockey, tennis, baseball, boxing, 3 different Olympics. I went to Torino, Beijing, and Vancouver.
Wow.
And I literally started there at 21 years old, and I had these tremendous editors. I was covering hockey at a national magazine at 21,
Hmm.
and if I didn't turn in the story in the shape that they wanted it to be in, I had editors who would sit with me and go over it with me and tell me why it wasn't up to par and tell me how to fix it, and then they would let me do it. There's a lot of editors who would just take the stuff and rewrite it themselves, but I was really able to learn with those people. So that was really where I kind of I don't know, got my chops in the sports writing business.
Yeah, so how grateful are you that ESPN Magazine gave you the first opportunity to start your career? And what was that experience like covering both? I think now is it really important for reporters and journalists to cover multiple sports? And what was that like just to experience different sports and learning different players' personalities? And what was the Olympics experience like?
So there's a lot there. Let me start with so covering different sports at ESPN Magazine that was great, and that does not happen a lot. People are really specialized. But what was really cool about it was that at ESPN Magazine in the 2000s, when ad sales in print journalism were really good and they had a budget, you could, even if you were the hockey writer or the tennis writer or the baseball writer, if you had an idea about something else, you could pitch it and they would let you do it. And they would also assign you stories that they thought would be in your wheelhouse that you might be good at writing, right? So they sent me out on a golf story. At the time, I knew nothing about golf. So you have to kind of do your homework and immerse yourself and learn what's important in that sport, what's important to the athlete that you're covering. And the other thing that was cool about ESPN Magazine is that because it came out every 2 weeks, the stories couldn't just be the Yankees beat the White Sox 4-2 last night. They had to be these evergreen human interest, like deeper background stories about the athlete that would last on the newsstand for 2 weeks and would also still be interesting if someone picked it up in the dentist office 6 months after it came out, right? Could just pick it up sitting down, waiting for their appointment. So the stories that you came up with had to be interesting and relatable on a human level as opposed to just a sports level. And that was really cool to kind of get to spend time with athletes to get to that point. I feel like a lot of the writing we do today, because the internet has made things so quick, you don't really get to spend that time with people anymore. And social media has made it such that the athletes feel like they're sharing enough with the public already that they don't need to give that time to journalists anymore. So things have changed a lot since I've been there. The Olympics, covering the Olympics is a privilege to be there because you witness some really cool stuff, but it is a grind. You spend 90% of your time on a bus, and that is not an exaggeration. You don't eat, you don't sleep, you don't shower for 3 weeks. It's like it is tough. But again, it is really cool to be there. So looking back on that, like I'm definitely, I don't really want to be there again, but I'm definitely glad that I was there then.
Yeah, hopefully, hopefully this year we can have the Olympics this year, hopefully, but in Tokyo. So I want to ask you. So after your ESPN Magazine career, now you transitioned to MLB Network. How did that come about, and what was the experience on MLB Network with like?
So MLB Network was interesting. It was so I was employed by MLB.com, Baseball Advanced Media, and my job was to write stories for the internet and then kind of go on TV and talk about them. And the magazine, I kind of grew up in journalism at the magazine, having time to really report stories. Comes out every 2 weeks. We certainly were writing like takeouts for the web, and I was covering a lot of stuff online on deadline for ESPN.com. But MLB.com was a much more like go to this event and cover it kind of job. So it was a little bit different than what I had been used to at ESPN. I also at MLB kind of developed this health and injury and fitness niche. They didn't really have a reporter that, you know, that was kind of their wheelhouse. So I started writing a lot about surgeries and how athletes' injuries and the recovery from them would impact their ability to play their positions on the field, the biomechanics of injuries, you know, why there's so many oblique injuries, why there's so many hamstring injuries, how training has evolved, and why these problems are arising even as training is evolving and we know more. So I did a lot of that kind of stuff at MLB, which is kind of what got me into this like health and fitness niche now, where I'm doing a lot for men's health and writing for some you know, different supplement companies, and now hosting the Food of the Gods podcast about elite athletes and their nutrition and training.
Yeah, so obviously I've seen you were on MLB Network a lot, and what was describe your best moment on MLB Network, and obviously you talked about you were on the Hot Stove show once, MLB Hot Stove, and explain to me what was your best moment on there?
I mean, I was on Hot Stove a lot, and I used to do MLB Central, the morning show, a lot. I have no idea what my best moment on MLB Network was. I mean, personally, I was on the stations a lot trying to get the signatures to get my grandfather the Presidential Medal of Freedom, to get people to sign that petition. So those were the ones that were most personally important to me. And I definitely remember those because they helped me to get the signatures to get my grandfather the Presidential Medal of Freedom. But as far as just like one television spot, I don't really remember.
Yeah, so what's it like now helping athletes? So in their health and fitness you just mentioned, and making sure they stay healthy throughout their careers. And I'm big into fitness too. I work out a lot, but for you though, what's it like just to help them and give them the right right feedback for their fitness journey?
I'm definitely not training them or
Oh no, not training. Yeah.
no. I'm just with Food of the Gods. We're just sort of interviewing athletes and talking to them about how they eat and train to perform at the highest level, and hoping that normal people who listen to the podcast can kind of take something away from each athlete, because everybody's very, very different. Our first episode was with Michael Lorenzen, who's a pitcher and outfielder for the Reds, and he's like gluten-free, dairy-free. You know, he's very strict with his diet. He works out a ton. Shari Hawkins, the second one, is an Olympic heptathlete. She's got the Olympic trials coming up next week, actually. And she is not gluten-free or dairy-free. She doesn't believe in eliminating stuff, but she does eat a very healthy diet. We have one coming up. The episode that drops tomorrow is with Bradley Bozeman, who's an offensive lineman for the Ravens, and he eats cream cheese bagels before he goes on the field. Very, very different. So everybody has a different take on what they need to fuel their performance in their workouts, and everybody has a different idea about how much you need to work out, and everybody is different, and there's no program that's one size fits all. So we really just think that sharing the stories of each of these athletes, then the folks who listen can kind of take bits and pieces from each one and figure out a program and a lifestyle that works for them.
Yeah, we actually had Bradley Bozeman and his wife on the show too a couple months back, and they're awesome to talk to, and they're really an inspiration. And for you, so how often? Obviously, you started this recently, right? Your podcast, and it's growing. And how did this come about? And how grateful for you to have this podcast with you now.
So yeah, it's definitely an area that I am super interested in, and I just personally love to talk to people about their training and how they eat, and so it's fun for me to do the interviews. You know, it came about in sort of that serendipitous way that most things in the world happen. I have a friend that I used to work with when I was at ESPN Magazine covering hockey. He worked at the New York Times covering a lot of hockey. He happens to live in the same building with one of the podcast producers. They saw each other and had a conversation, and the producer said, you know, we're starting this sports nutrition and fitness podcast, and we need a host. And my friend said, oh my God, you should talk to Lindsay Berra. And he reached out to me, and that was kind of how it came about. And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds really cool. I talk to people about that stuff all the time. I can certainly record it. Yeah. So yeah, it's cool. And it's definitely, like I said, something that really interests me. I was an athlete all growing up. I played softball and I played men's club hockey in college. I was the only girl on the boys hockey team my whole life, all
Wow.
growing up. I did triathlons for years. I've been a CrossFitter and a CrossFit coach since 2008. I hike all over the world. I say I have really bad adult ADD and I have to get the energy out somehow. So I'm very interested in the whole fitness thing. So it's great to talk to the pros and get their takes on how they approach their diet and nutrition and their training.
Yeah, that's amazing. The only female in the men's hockey club. And speaking of that, I want to get, this is an important topic that everyone should be talking about, women in sports. And for you, and what's it like seeing the growth, seeing Sarah Fuller being the first female kicker, Sarah Thomas, first female ref, and some like Becky Hammond getting a chance to coach in the NBA. And what's it like seeing the growth of that? And even yourself playing men's hockey, and there's a women's hockey league now too. And
Yeah.
so
It's really cool because when I was a kid, I'm 43 years old. I hate
wow.
to say that, but when I was a kid in the early 80s, there were no girls hockey teams. I had to play with the boys. And as I got older and the boys started to get bigger, it's one thing, you can certainly play with the boys, but back then it wasn't super accepted. And I just used to get pummeled all the time. Like they would just, come after me because I was the only girl. And I think nowadays there are still a lot of girls playing on boys teams, but it's a little bit more accepted and it's not that like really dangerous headhunting situation anymore, which is great to see. But it's also great to see that there are so many more opportunities for girls to play sports with girls and play all the sports. And just as we go along and women are getting more and more opportunities to do things on the field, in broadcasting, in coaching, working for teams, working in strength and conditioning, it's amazing because I know covering sports over the years, there are certainly a lot of really smart men coaching and in the strength and conditioning world, but there are a ton of smart females too. And it's great to see that their voices and their input are finally being heard and they're given a chance to contribute in ways that are like really amazing. So when I was a young kid, I didn't have a lot of female role models in the sports world, and now there are so many for young girls, which is terrific.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, and obviously this you're interested in the health and fitness aspects, and if the right opportunity comes about, would you consider being like a strength and conditioning coach or whatever you want to be with the team or with the baseball, whatever sport? Would you consider that?
Well, that's a whole different line of schooling. I went to journalism school. To be a strength and conditioning coach at a professional level, you need to have an exercise physiology, exercise science degree. You need CSCS. Like this is like 10 years of schooling that I haven't done. So I even though I am very knowledgeable from asking questions to people with that kind of schooling for many, many years, I am certainly not qualified to apply for or be considered for any of those jobs. Those are folks who've gone to school for many, many years to accomplish that.
So I want to ask you, how often do you guys record your podcasts, and and then when it comes to reaching out to your guests, how often do you guys reach out to guests to come on the show?
We're always reaching out to guests to find people for podcasts down the road. Right now, we are releasing it in this once a week cadence on Wednesdays. We really just launched the podcast. We have our third one coming out tomorrow. And I think we were going to shoot for 12 in this first season, and then see where it goes from there.
So what's it like now? Let me ask you, what's the scouting report on Lindsay Berra as a softball player?
My God, she's old and washed up. It's been years since I was a softball player. When I was young, I played a lot of positions. I was certainly thrown into being a catcher quite a bit, given that I was a Berra. And I actually was a pretty good catcher, but I did not love it. I'm a little bit, like I said, I have some adult ADD issues, and I was pretty hyperactive as a kid too. And just staying behind the plate was not really my MO. I like to run around in the outfield, and soccer, I played midfield so I could run up and down the wings like a lunatic. And I through high school kind of became more of an outfielder. And in college, I was an outfielder as well. I'm not the biggest person, so I was more of like a line drive, singles, doubles kind of punch hitter. And in high school, I was pretty known for the sneaky Mickey Mantle bunt single, like when you have to get on base, just dropping one down and running it out. So that was me.
Yeah, so obviously the Yogi Berra Museum is in Jersey. So for you, how often do you visit that place, and what's it like just for them to represent your grandfather like that?
So the museum is very close to my house, literally like a 3-minute drive. And COVID obviously changed everything. We have since reopened, but we don't really have the school groups coming through yet. Most of the school groups are being done virtually. So I do those all the time. Once we get up and running again, I'll be up there as much as possible, as often as I can, to help with those school group tours. We love seeing the kids, and it's super important to me and my family to continue to share grandpa's story, both in sports and his story as an Italian immigrant and a World War II veteran who went on to live this amazing life with this next generation of kids. I want him to be remembered as a great baseball player, but I want him to be remembered as a better human. So it's just important to me to really keep telling those stories, and I'll be as involved with it as they let me, for as long as they will let me be involved. We do have this, the post office is honoring him with a forever stamp that's coming out next Thursday. And I think that's pretty cool. It literally says Yogi Berra forever on the stamp. And it's just a great picture. It's like this great smiley picture of him with his catcher's stuff on, and I think he has his Yankee cap on it. But even if you don't know who Yogi Berra is, you're going to get this little stamp in the mail and be like, who's this smiling, happy fellow? And maybe you want to find out who he is. And then you learn a little bit about Yogi Berra through the stamp. So I think that's great. He would have been thrilled. But yeah, the museum is here on the camp in New Jersey, on the campus of Montclair State University, and we're open now again after COVID. So come visit.
Yeah, so everybody should know your grandfather. Come on, if no one knows him, then something's wrong.
Oh, but it's the kids now. Like if you're, it usually comes from the parents, and if the parents didn't see them play, then they don't have any experience with it. And now 30-year-olds have kids who are old enough to play baseball, and the 30-year-olds certainly didn't see grandpa play, so he's not as much in their awareness. And if he is, it's more for the yogiisms than his ability as a baseball player. So they might have this vague recollection of there was this like guy who said some funny things, but they don't remember that he's a guy who won 10 World Series and 3 MVPs and is in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, so what advice would you give to these young girls and young kids, or whoever, young athletes that are trying to reach their goals?
I mean, young athletes, I would just say really play as many sports as you can. You don't need to play baseball year round. You don't need to play basketball year round until you're like way older, right? Like most of the people who were in the Hall of Fame were not total standout studs until they were like in high school and college. You don't need to be the best 12-year-old. What's important at 12 is to go and play different sports and learn different motor skills for your body and become a well-rounded, healthy, efficient, moving athlete that will allow you to play to the point where you can be the best. So I think multiple sports, not bogging kids down with so many practices in the same sport that it's just not fun anymore. You got to have fun. And that's the other thing is, if your kid is pushed so hard at a young age that his sport becomes work, he's not going to get a chance to make it to play in college or to play professionally, because he's going to find something to do that's more fun than the work that sports has become. So play a lot of sports and have fun doing it. As far as like the kids who want to get into sports journalism, I would say nowadays it's so important to just be well-rounded, to be able to write, to be able to tell stories on video, to be able to take pictures, to write short things for social media, to create graphics. So just kind of become proficient in as many skills as possible.
Yeah, so now we do this fun little segment on the show. It's called the rapid fire segment. You ready for this?
I don't know if I'm ready. Let's see.
Yeah, so do you have any like events coming up or in-person events, or what do you guys have coming up down the line?
Thursday, June 24th at 9:30 a.m. at Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center is the post office stamp release celebration. It's the first day cover event that the post office has done since COVID. So we're expecting a big turnout. The museum will be open.
Okay.
The museum is adjacent to the Montclair State University baseball field where the New Jersey Jackals also play. They're a minor league team. The stadium will be open. The concessions will be open. Kids will be able to go and play on the field and run the bases and play catch. So that all starts at 9:30, runs through 12 o'clock. It'll be a great morning at the museum. We've got the third episode of Food of the Gods podcast coming out tomorrow with Bradley Bozeman of the Ravens. You can check that out on foodofthegodspodcast.com. You can find us on any of the podcast platforms. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Food of the Gods Pod. I have on June 23rd a YouTube TV series that will also run on MLB Network that I did with Carlos Pena and several curators from the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. And it's called Hall of Fame Connections. And it talks about a lot of the artifacts that they have in the museum. And it's just kind of telling stories through those artifacts. Carlos and I had a lot of fun shooting that. There will be 14 episodes of that drop once a week starting next Wednesday, June 23rd on MLB Network and on the Hall of Fame's YouTube channel. I'm trying to think what else I have coming up. Let me think. Go for the next question.
So since you were a former softball player, did you watch this year's tournament?
I've been like popping in and out. I haven't watched like the whole thing, but when I sit down in front of the TV and it's on, I definitely have been watching, and it has been very exciting. And that's another thing that I'm super excited to see, that women's softball is getting that airtime on national television, because it is super fun to watch. And I'm always on Twitter and I see all these men saying, this is stupid, it's not that hard. I'm like, oh yeah, go in there and hit a 72 mile an hour, riser from one of these amazing pitchers. It's like 105 from a baseball pitcher, and it will be up your nose before you know what to do with it. So they need to all stop their chirping. But it's great to see it on ESPN. I love it.
I don't know if you saw Olivia Taylor's catch when she jumped over the fence, but if you saw it, what was your reaction to that?
I saw the highlight. It just, awesome. And it just brings back so many memories. I ran through this orange plastic temporary fencing once in high school, got myself all stuck in it and caught the ball. Like it just brings back a lot of memories of my own playing. But yeah, bravo. Nice catch.
So your grandfather has a famous saying, it's not over till it's over. How often do you say that to people?
I say it pretty often, I guess. Like I just say like it ain't over yet or something like that. I use take the fork a lot. When you come to a fork in the road, take it. In my family, take the fork has kind of become a euphemism for like get off your butt, get moving. What are you waiting for? Take the fork. So like I'll even think that to myself in the morning. Like if I get up and I'm like dilly-dallying before going out into the garage to get my workout going, I'll be like, all right, come on, let's take the fork, let's go. But the yogiisms, like so many of them are silly. I like the existential ones better. If the world were perfect, it wouldn't be. The future ain't what it used to be. But I definitely do use them quite often. They're smart, and he had such a great way of looking at the world. And I definitely like to perpetuate it by working them into conversation. I also use deja vu all over again quite often. And you can observe a lot by watching.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any like memories with him before he passed away? What was your memorable memories?
I mean, I was really lucky. So many of us lose our grandparents when we are young. My mother's mother passed away before I was born. My mother's father when I was 17. So I had my Grammy Carmen and my Grandpa Yogi until I was 36 and 38 years old. So to have my Grandpa Yogi for 38 years of my life was very special. I mean, there are more memories than I could possibly even recount. And what was so special was that, when you're a kid and you have a relationship with your grandparents, they're kind of the people you visit on the holidays. They give you good presents at Christmas. But I got to have this really adult relationship and like friendship with both of my grandparents, and really got to know them and where they came from. And not a lot of us get that opportunity. So I lived very close to my grandparents. I would be up there, a couple nights a week, kind of eating leftovers off their stove and just hanging out and chatting. And, grandpa was really into what I was doing. My grandmother used to dog ear all my stories in ESPN Magazine so he could read them. And then we would talk about where I had gone to do the story. So I was really close with both of them. Specific memories, like I think about like making meatballs at Christmas time and decorating the Christmas tree. Grandpa was pretty good on the barbecue, but he always burned the hot dogs, but it didn't matter because the hot dogs were best burnt anyway. You know, he liked to watch Seinfeld reruns, so sometimes I'd go up there and sit there and watch Seinfeld. We used to watch fights together. He was Grandpa was actually an undefeated boxer in the Navy and got me into boxing as a kid, so we would watch fights together. He used to take me to tons of Devils games. Like I said, there's just like too many memories to recount, and I was very, very lucky to be able to spend the amount of time with him that I did.
Favorite food?
His favorite food or mine?
Yours.
Chocolate.
Chocolate.
And tacos. It's because it's Taco Tuesday, but I love tacos. I do love tacos.
Yeah, you gonna have tacos today?
I probably will not have tacos tonight because I'm going to play 9 holes of golf, but tomorrow night I'm definitely. I actually just got the stuff to make tacos. I went to the grocery store this morning, so yeah.
So speaking of golf, how's your golf game?
Terrible, but it's fun. I didn't start. So I played so many sports growing up, and most of my family were golfers. I had no interest in it as a kid at all. My grandparents were members of a golf club, and the faster I could hit all of my allotted golf balls into the woods, the faster I could go back to the pool and play shark with my friends. So I had no interest in golf whatsoever. I started about maybe 3.5 years ago because my boyfriend is really into it. And learning golf as a 40-year-old is really, really difficult. But I'm like a 20 handicap, and when it's nice out, I like to go out and walk. I usually walk 9 holes, and it's fun. And Grandpa Yogi used to say, any shot in golf that goes in front of you is a good shot, and that is the outlook I try to bring. So I hit the ball, and even if it goes 10 feet, I follow it and I hit it again. It's great.
So, what was your most memorable game that you covered as a reporter, journalist, and the most memorable interview you've done?
Those are tough questions too. So I remember Usain Bolt breaking the 100-meter record in Beijing. That was pretty cool. I remember when Ray Bork was traded from the Bruins to the Avalanche to try to get a Stanley Cup, and I was there when he actually beat the Devils, which was my team growing up, to win the Stanley Cup. And that was just, I actually just got goosebumps thinking about it. That was really cool. Trying to think, like really neat one. I was at Yogi Berra Day when my grandpa Yogi went back to Yankee Stadium after 14 years away, and with all of my cousins and my dad and my uncles and my grandmother, and we got to hear the folks at Yankee Stadium give him a standing ovation for the first time in our lives. I wasn't covering that as a reporter. I was there as a family member, but that was pretty amazing. Memorable interviews. I covered a lot of tennis at ESPN Magazine, and I was always so impressed with Roger Federer because the guy speaks like 5 languages. I mean, he doesn't speak them all perfectly, but he speaks German, Swiss German, English, French, Spanish, a little Mandarin, Chinese, like right crazy. And he'll sit there and answer questions in all of those languages for the people who speak them. And it was just always really impressive to watch him do that. So I feel like a lot of those tennis players that are bilingual like that, I was always very impressed with them.
Yeah, so a couple more things here before I let you go. Do you still watch Yankees baseball a lot?
I do. So I don't sit down. I very rarely sit down and watch a game from start to finish. I actually was just talking about this with someone the other day, but most nights the game is on in my living room, and as I'm doing whatever I'm doing around the house, I pass through the living room, I watch an at bat or a couple pitches or whatever and move on. But I just find the sounds of the baseball game to be so like comforting and calming mentally. It's like the sounds of my childhood.
Yeah.
So whether I'm paying attention to it fully or not, it is usually on in the house.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's like whenever you watch it, it seems like this team has it's the kind of no energy this year, and obviously they're struggling. It's not the same as back in the day, but I don't know, like how concerned are you about this year's team?
I mean, concerned is a strong word. One thing that I really learned from my grandfather, and then also from being a reporter, like it's funny. It's like he was a very practical sports fan, right? And he always said that you lose when you don't play well enough to win, right? And if you're not going to play well enough to win, you can't really complain about losing, right? And that is where I sort of feel like the Yankees are right now. And as frustrating as it is for Yankee fans, they're not playing well. Like, how upset can you really get when you're not delivering, right? Like, you can't expect a different outcome when you're not performing on the field. And it's tough to say that, and it kind of sounds like harsh because you want to be like, go Yankees, but like, you got to do the little things, guys. You got to start putting the bat on the ball and making the plays and showing up on a day-to-day basis. It's a long season, right? You can't only show up for a third of the games and expect to do well, right? So it's frustrating, but like, also as a sports reporter, I kind of learned over the years that you become less of a fan of one team and more you learn to really enjoy watching the guys that are really turning in good performances, guys who have good backstories, guys who are overcoming something. So you kind of focus on something else that's going on. Like, I can't wait to watch the track and field Olympic trials. There's so many people with cool stories that I want to see perform there. I had done a story for Men's Health on a Olympic shot putter named Joe Kovacs. We had Shari Hawkins, the heptathlete, on the podcast. I did another interview with Chloe Abbott, who's a 400-meter runner. I have a friend who's in the 800-meter trial. So like, that's like kind of what I'm really looking forward to this summer.
Yeah. So before we get to the last few things, who do you have in the Stanley Cup Finals, NBA Finals?
My God, I'm really not paying that much attention to even be able to pick. No.
All right, so the last few things here. Our team is part of this foundation called the Hugh Jackson Foundation. We're trying to help them prevent human trafficking and making sure the community's safe and the kids stay safe. And it's still horrible out there what we're seeing about human trafficking. So hopefully we can stop it at some point. So I'll send you the page. You can go check it out.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, anytime. And the last thing here, would you like to say anything to all the nurses, doctors, and essential workers right now?
I mean, thank you. Bravo. You're all total champs. While the rest of us were complaining about having to stay home and watch Netflix, you guys were out doing super meaningful stuff, and I personally really, really appreciate it.
Well said. And there it is. That wraps up episode 819 with the talented sports journalist Lindsay Berra. She used to work for MLB Network, ESPN Magazine. Now she has a show called Food Off the Gods podcast. Go check that out. They do a great job with that. And go follow her on all social media formats. And obviously, she's the granddaughter of Yankees legend Yogi Berra. But I just want to say thank you again for joining the show. It's truly an honor. You're such an inspiration. Keep up the great work. I'll post this on all social media formats. And you and your family stay safe.
Thank you so much. And you're in New Jersey. Please come visit the museum sometime.
I will. And